Tala Falava and welcome to the Global Bus Figure Success Podcast. I'm Andrew Fa'avali, your host. Every week I'll be chatting with successful Pacific people from across the globe, unpacking their stories and more importantly, picking out insights, lessons and golden nuggets you can use to live your best life too. All right, this week I'm excited to bring you Kale Panoho. Kale is an internationally acclaimed entrepreneur and marketer who's based out of Dunedin, Aotearoa, but he also consults and runs businesses across the globe. Kale is of Maori heritage and was born in Brisbane, Australia, and from his own account, he had a pretty rough upbringing in Australia. It sounds like his saving grace was his mother's decision to relocate to Clyde in Central Otago, New Zealand to get away and start afresh. Kale seemed to have thrived in Clyde at school and through uni and then went on to become a PT and has had crazy success since, with a really popular story being that he started a gym with his cousins with $200 as startup money, and he raised $220,000 in just 14 days before the gym had even opened. So with numbers like this, it's no surprise that Kale was headhunted by global giants such as Tik Tok and Microsoft to help with their brand, and he now owns 3 businesses, K&J Growth, Rugby Bricks and Hakune. These businesses have offices as far afield as LA, Amsterdam and of course Dunedin. So personally, I came across Kale on LinkedIn, where in and amongst the clutter of tips and advice for business owners and marketing, Kale's content really shone. It stood out because it was uniquely easy to consume and amazingly even easier to implement. He strikes me as a really interesting dude. He's interesting in that he has that rare skill of taking complex ideas and processes and chunking them down to simple bite-sized pieces of info that people like myself can follow. So very grateful for his content already, and I just had to have him on the show. In light of all that, then, man, it's a massive honor to have Kale Panoho on the podcast. Thank you and welcome, bro.
Hello, bro. Great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. So you're in Dunedin. Can I start with your name, man? Kale, where'd that come from?
Funny, we had a call deal this morning about this. So the process was, there's like 2 parts to the story. My dad tells it differently to my mum, but my mum says it was trying to decide between Kale and Kane, and they landed on Kale. And then my dad just said, like, hey, we like the musician JJ Kale. But they're like, we can't give him exactly C-A-L-E. Yeah. So let's go K-A-L-E. And, 33 years ago, it wasn't the popular super health food that is today, which is now the moniker for an average tasting cruciferous vegetable, and now my name.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I like it. It's unique. People remember it. I've seen it on LinkedIn and I know, that's the dude who writes that really great content. Can we just have a look at your background a little bit and then we'll get into the pointy end of, what you're doing now? But can you just tell us about where were you born and raised down there in the deep south?
No, I wasn't, bro. So I was closer to, I was born in Southport. So in the, yeah, in the GC. Oh, so yeah, my mum and dad met, my dad was 21, my mum's 33. So a bit of an age gap. And they had me, not intentionally, down in the Gold Coast. So started there, and, one of the things that I look at least, and resharing some of the story, which is, we grew up in a single parent household. So my dad left when I was about 4, and just due to internal fighting conflict in our parents. And it was a really interesting space. I grew up in a place called Ormiston in Brisbane. And so, yeah, went to school there and didn't make a lot of school. My mum, after she split with my dad, had a tough time. She drank pretty heavily and, became an alcoholic. And so we missed a fair bit of school growing up. I got to a point where there was a little bit of intervention between hey, your kids aren't at school. You need to sort this stuff out. And we made the snap decision. And my mum, I think probably the best thing she's ever done for us was saying, hey, we're going to move to a place called Clyde, which is, for anyone who's
recording in progress.
For anyone who's familiar with the deep south, or knowing where that is, and Clyde, that's at the bottom of the South Island. And so she made that process to move us over there. And one of the things that came from that, and I consider this to be probably the most fortunate part of our story, we missed a lot of school in Brisbane. And so as a result, academically, we were quite far behind when we came there. But in Clyde, you could get yourself to school, right? I couldn't walk to school when I was in Brisbane, in Ormiston. It's too little. But in Clyde, you could just get up and get to school. So grew up there and then had, 10 to 18. Again, bit of a rocky household. if mum drinks and she was in that type of process, wasn't ideal, wasn't the easiest space to grow up in. And if you're on the benefit, like there's always not that much cash to go around. But became normal for me to attend school, hang out with people who then thought it was normal to attend university, copy them. And then from there, academically, went and studied personal training, got a diploma in PT, did my grad dip in athlete conditioning, and then went to uni and did biochem, and then took a gap year into the startup and entrepreneurship stuff, which most people know about that part of the story. But yeah, that's the sort of the day one and the fast version of it, right?
How old were you when you came over from Brisbane to Clyde?
10. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I try and share it because it's the part of the story that most people have no association or don't know about. But ideally, and I think of Maori and Pacifica, a lot of our people suffer disproportionately on the lower socioeconomic status scale, right? And so just due to whether that is substance abuse, low income household, and some of those things. And I try and say, look, this is the beginning. And fortuitously, I don't think I probably might have been in a very similar space, but people we hang out with also in Brisbane were on the benefit. Got really lucky that our environment changed. And, for me, I believe you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with. And I've spoken about this a lot, to quote from Jim Rohn. But by moving to Clyde, just became normal that, you go to school, you do a type of those things. So yeah, hopefully it's more relatable and gives people an understanding that, hey, you can have a crack from maybe not the best beginning.
Yeah, so there's two parts there. There's the environment, so internals that was going on. So we talked just a bit before about belief. So your belief wasn't really shifted, even though you were going through those things here in Brisbane. You still had a pretty strong self-belief, or
no. Yeah, I was fortuitously that I was maybe brighter than what maybe the average kid at our age was, and so I think that was a benefit for me, and that allowed me to probably or grasp onto things there. But I didn't think I had any shift or belief that I was maybe better than anyone else. I just became more apparent as I did more things as I went through school. Was good at sport and when was rewarded for being good at sport. And some of those things that allowed me to be a sort of an anchor to then, okay, cool, academically I could do this. But the other side of it too was that at school, I didn't really like talking too much in Clyde Primary, because if you come over and you go from Brisbane to rural Central Otago Clyde, and you have an Australian accent, you one of the things you probably want to work on is not talking too much. And so you listen a lot. And I was very, very fortunate to then to be able to spend a lot of time listening to my teachers and then cotton on to what I needed to do to get ahead academically.
Yeah, so I'm interested in your smarts, because how I kind of see marketing is you're trying to tell a story, so it's very qualitative, and by that is like very science of psychology, and then the stats of data and stuff like that. And it feels like that's the complexity you take out for people like me, is that we've got these things that we have to battle with, like data, stats, all these kinds of things, which are different side of the brain, but then you tell it so simply. How do you get that mix? Have you always had that mix, or have you worked on that mix, or have you thought about it?
Yeah, look, I want to hopefully and dispel this pretty early, but I don't believe that there's any sort of innate talent to people. There's certainly some stuff, but most of it's worked on and then honed. So for me, a lot of it was, I looked at the people who were able to, from coming from the situation, the background I was in, which was pretty poor, to getting rich quite quickly. One of the things that they were able to do is they seemed to be people who would have a grasp, and it was a term called growth hacking, which is where the name K&J Growth came from. But essentially that was, tech companies like Dropbox and some of these things in the late 2000s, early 2000s, where there's a marketer, and I forget his name, Ryan is his first name, but I forget the last name. And he came up with this term where he wanted to be differentiated from someone who was a brand marketer, like let's buy billboards, to let's figure out how to use a bit of data and tell this story at a cheaper scale. And for me, that really appealed to the idea of like what growth hacking is, which is essentially, and now rebranded and probably the term is like growth heads of growth or growth marketing, where you can sort of tell a story but use faster ways of scale. And that was a really appealing piece, because they talked about what you said, right, which is consumer psychology. And then the second part, which that comes behind that, is what data or things can you use to back that up? And for children to see during through chem and biochem, the ability to sort of pick up numbers. I used R at university, which is just a language for statistics, how to write and use code. And that was one of the things that was then a little bit crossover to the marketing piece, right? Can you write good copy that tells a story? And I read a whole lot of books around this. There was a whole bevy of them. I've got a lot of them here in my library, but one's called Growth Hacker Marketing by Ryan Holiday. I just read a lot of blogs. Tim Ferriss's stuff was really great. Bloke who wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, and all of those people would say, hey, here's how to do these things, but they'd also have a great compelling narrative and story behind them. And I quickly realized, like, okay, cool. If you do some of the stuff and you can tell a better story with some data and numbers to back it up, you then have this recipe and formula for growth. So
that's what your content kind of reminds me of. Tim Ferriss, is just how he has these simple things, but he's into stoicism and he's into all these, data and stuff like that. So we looked at that intersection. What about the intersection of culture? Obviously, you're Maori brought up for your first 10 years in Brisbane. So there, there were kind of different cultures in that story, and then coming over back to Aotearoa. And then just the fundamentals, like it's a very narrative culture, the Maori culture, just Western culture, which is very low context and black and white. So has that has that, or more explicit rather than metaphors and narratives, has that fed into your ability to market and bring all these concepts together?
I wish it had. And this is something that, like, there's a complete absence of culture in my life, probably till up about 25. If you'd asked me how I said, and you pronounce my name perfectly, if you'd asked me at age 25, 26, I would have said my name is Panoho. And I didn't have anything there. I went to an event with a bloke, we were at Hollis, and I was speaking and I said my name. And then one of the Henny Moore elder, so she's a doctor here, and she's produced a lot of good information around Te Ao Māori and producing that. And she comes up and she says, kia ora, I'm your auntie. And at this stage, I'm like, are you? She's got Mokuai. I'm sick. I'm like, oh, yeah. She's like, I'm Ngāpui. And I was like, man. I was like, I knew that was my iwi, but that was as far as it went. And she's like, I think, when you're having your kōrero, like, that's not how you say your last name. And I was like, oh. I was sitting there. I was like, how do I say it? And she's like, it's Panoho. And I was like, and she's like, yeah, we should try and have more of a kōrero. And from there, that's always been something that I've been thinking about. And it's only realistically probably in the last 3 years become a pretty important piece of who I am. One, because I won some awards and I got up on stage after winning a pretty prestigious award by Whakaata Māori, butchered the speech, did it in complete, like, great English, terrible, no, like, lack of te reo. And I realized the straight at the end, I was like, oh, fuck, this room really definitely wants me to be speaking in te reo. Yeah. Stutter on the end of it, get out of it. And these people come up to me at the end, and it was like, okay, cool, I've got to figure this out. I'm going to be supporting or representing our community. And so, again, te te ako tono ho I te reo Māori, like, I'm still learning te reo Māori, and it's a very slow process at the moment. But the ability to bring in culture, and one of the things that we do really well is storytelling, but it's never been the part of the influence for me. And the reason, though, which has been drawn me back to it, is I wouldn't want to repeat my childhood. And it's the same thing that you and I were having a kōrero or a chat for at the start, which is, poverty and some of these situations where we are, they disproportionately affect our people, right? Burden of health, issues, all of these things, we were overrepresented, all of the wrong statistics. And so big driver for me is I just would never want to repeat my childhood. And I look at that as an ability to say, okay, cool, I'm now in a position where, the immediate day-to-day is not worrying about can I eat or worry about my rent. And we have excess capital, and, I'm building things. We're able to employ people similar to you in that, right? And so that's been a lot of my drive back, and some of the stuff, and probably someone else who should have on the podcast, Sarah Whaavai. Mika, she's in Otatahi, but she's our COO at Rugby Bricks, and she's one of the best. But for her similar big reason, right? She wants to be able to help our people, and for me, it's like employing our people, teaching them these skills, because we're great as Maori, as Pacifica, at looking after and giving away our time. We're not so good at understanding how to monetize that time, and we're trying to cut up a pie that's already too small for me. And so a lot of me adopting our culture and learning and coming through these fundamentals is to, one, get closer and understand what my kaupapa is, where I can help him, why I can do that. But two is I'm really fortunate to have a US co-founder, and I've learned a lot on how to build businesses, create growth, and then use entrepreneurship as a vehicle for creating wealth, and how people can do that in a really meaningful way. We just don't know how to, or don't have access to the people to teach that.
Yeah, appreciate there's heaps in there, man. But I just want to say congratulations, because you know that cultural piece. I think it's very similar to a lot of children here. Well, my children here in Australia. You know, I'm Samoan, the New Zealand, the Niuean, Tongan, and Samoan. We refer to New Zealand as home. But it's just never too late to go searching for your whakapapa and understanding, you know, who you are. And so, you know, the past 3 years, it seems like there's an acceleration. Hinamo out is really all of our auntie, isn't she? She used to be on TV and those.
Yeah, that's really a lot of circling back to her, eh?
I was like, man, she's a doctor and all this. Like, but man, for me in my childhood, she was on TV and like those kids. But no, congratulations, and I think that wealth part is a really important part, because you know when we think about the drivers for suicide and things like this, a lot of it we kind of term socioeconomic, but a lot of it is just straight economic.
Yeah.
Like, given your background, how have you been able to manage wealth creation and the wealth that you've come through on at such a young age? Because to even that story around 200 to 200,000 blows people's minds, you know. How have you managed that, given that it's not old money?
Yeah, then it comes back to that developing that skill set of growth hacking, and even earlier than that average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So when I went to uni, moved in with some really great blokes who were either doctors, dentists, or people who were coming from good families, and their whānau were well versed in terms of this. And one of them was studying entrepreneurship. And initially he was like, yeah, I'm going to this thing, I'm going to try and make a company and make, ideally it comes through and gets seed funding of like, 100 grand. And I was like, what the fuck is that? Like, it's like, what does that mean? How do you do that? And so he introduced me to Tim Ferriss. He was trying all his experiments at the time, and I got to read the 4-Hour Work Week. And from there, I was sort of hooked. I was like, wow, this is like what life might look like. And I'd worked in a startup. I took a gap year to work in a company called Education Perfect. And during that time, it was like I was calling people up and selling them the software, and the software wasn't changing. Like, it was getting better and we were building it, but like it would sell it to like multiple kids and this education software to the school, and then it would sell 300 of them, and then they would pay this much for the licenses, and I'd see where that cash was coming in. I was like, wow, this is sort of how this works and what you can do. And so that led me to reading more, spending more time. After reading Tim Ferriss, I got introduced to Ryan Holiday, who was, another growth hacker and someone who spends a lot of time, talks about stoicism and a lot of those things. And there was a really key pivotal article that came out for me that I read, which was Tim Ferriss made $100,000 in 10 days on Kickstarter. And I read this, and it's inspired pretty much how I've written copy or how I thought about it, because it was so prescriptive on, here's what you need to do. Write it at this time. Look at like this. Has to do this. Go press this, and this button. And for me, that was like wow, okay, I can do this. And it was easy enough that any person could pick it up and have a crack. And so for me, having gone into this job where Education Perfect, I'd earned more than I ever had in my entire life. I was able to buy, a laptop. I was living with good people, and I was learning a lot. And this led to the gym story, which was after finishing up there. And there's an in-between piece there where I get fired from a job, but come back to that if you want to. The pieces there is getting and going into this role and going to say, okay, cool, I've got a good set of skills. Background is personal training, grade dip. I love exercise. And I've got this sort of thing that I know about marketing, which should be, how would I want to sign people up and create revenue from that? And so that space was like, okay, cool. One, what are the conditions for us to open a gym, and how much does it cost? It's going to be like 80 grand, probably more. It's like, okay, we don't have that. And I don't want to spend $80,000 to find out if we actually have a viable business model. And so we set up in a place called Cromwell. For anyone who's familiar with Central Otago, pretty tiny place, like 3,000 people, and there's only one other gym. And so we went and bartered with a local landlord and being like, hey, can we borrow the space for 2 weeks? And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a makeshift gym, which was A3 and A4 pieces of paper of where equipment would be around this space that we just bartered out, create an event on Facebook, and we got what would be local community influencers to share it every night at 6 p.m. saying, hey, we're going to open a gym, test space here. If you want to come in and see it, have a look. And so we had all these people sharing these posts at 6 p.m. about an event that was happening on the weekend of these guys who are going to open a gym. And we'd set up all of these A3 and A4 pieces of paper. And the whole goal was like, come make your own gym. So we'd have people like, hey, that would look cool here. This is what you should do. We then had them sign a chalkboard as social proof. So other people would see, oh, who's been in here, who wants to help represent the space and make it happen. And then from there, we got them to sign an agreement saying, hey, you know, when the space opens, we'll take the cash out. And we signed up, 205 people in the space of 14 days. And that there, it was I guess the best piece was actually, we didn't get that money till the business was actually open, right? But we did have to invest and go through that process. But we had an insurance to say, hey, this business is going to open up and work in real time. So yeah, the way we handled it was surprise. And the other piece of just actually then pulling the execution together, able to pre-sell the idea very well. And then we managed to go through it. I think wealth creation, wealth generation didn't really happen for me probably till 3 years later, when we hit like our first 7-figure year in business, and getting that money early. I was probably 30 before we made our first million, and as a business, and being able to take home, a couple $100,000 or more in a year was sort of like, well, okay, this is pretty cool. And definitely made some stupid decisions at that point in time around just excess spending. But yeah, there's some lessons there in that type of space. But I think that maybe talks to a little bit about how we went through the experience and what some of those things look like.
Yeah, so what's the driver to open that gym, man? There's a lot of courage there.
Yeah, I mean, bro, and this is it. I think one of the things I went in with was ignorance. You shouldn't think in real, like this is the process. So we just got started. Like I knew, like, hey, there's no risks to starting this because the costs are so low. $200, we could scrape that together between, 3 of us. It was me and my 2 cousins. And the cost of that's not very high, right? Yeah, okay, we might look like dicks and not get it over the line, but there's not a high cost to that. And so, like, I knew what a good gym should look like. I was a personal trainer, and I knew what that was. I knew what good PTing looked like, and I knew good ways to create positive spaces for people. And so it seemed and it sounded sort of intimidating, the idea of it, but the execution didn't happen until we actually got everyone to sign, and then we had to go through that process. And that's when that's like cool. My cousin stepped in, who was a builder, and then who was able to bring a scaffolder, and a cousin who was a builder. And so we were able to choose the space, bring that to life, and figure that out. And that was when things the reality came around.
But that was a marketing player, because I've heard of a saying like marketing gets you the money and the product keeps the money.
Yeah. And that's perfect, bro. That sums it up really well, right? And we then, the gyms are there now. There's a Central Fitness in Cromwell, Picton, Kaikoura. Where else? And I think there's another one just outside of Christchurch, and I forget the name of the town. But there's another one there as well.
Do you sell that one, or are you still?
They're all in there, bro. We will still have them. Potentially, they might be going through sales now. But again, it's mostly with the cousins. Like, I'll come in, I'll advise, and I very rarely talk about much else on it. But it's cool. And that process of how we've opened is then taken to each town that we've gone to and found a similar situation. But yeah, it's just a cool piece, because the rest of the fun over then doing this and building those spaces.
That's awesome, man. Because it's back to community. I do want to just circle back to that fired part, because I just wanted to see, was that because you're a bad employee but really an entrepreneur?
Yeah, both probably. So I went through education perfect, and then got into this role. Which do you know Entertainment Book? Did you ever see one of those?
Yeah,
right. So I was the salesperson to be doing that in Dunedin, and I came in and with all the those little coupons where you would go to a restaurant, and then they'd be like, cool, here's your discount, and you'd rip one out and you'd give it off. And we were selling those, and basically their model was you'd sell those to organizations who would then sell it to their members as an uptick and an upsell. And so we would take a slice of that revenue, and that's how that worked. And so I was doing not a bad job at sales there, but not a fantastic one. And one of the things that I had to look after, or having a cordial, was actually around helping other people. And one of the things that was there was to be able to enable people how to sell. And I had people come to me and be like, hey, you're doing some good stuff in sales. That looks cool. How do we do it? And one of the things the people that were reporting or working alongside me, I was like, look, you just need to sell more. And that advice to any person who's ever received that is shit advice. You know what I mean? You don't know how to go out. How do I action that? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And I was really arrogant about it. I was just, cool. Like, hey, this is what we do. You got to go and just sell more. And like, doesn't make for a good team member. I didn't get fired, but I didn't get the 90-day trial. It was like, cool, don't come back. So, and that was a real eye opener. I was like, look, maybe at this point I'd gone from success, throughout uni, getting through some marginal things, getting to that space, polytechnic, things are okay, to inflating my own ego or what my worth was compared to figuring out what it needed to be. Because I'd had a trajectory from poor at 10 years old to, cool, I'm making money and I'm doing a good job at making money and I'm getting social accolades or congratulations on that, to then having to look after other people. And that's not a good way to coach people when you have that, or if you go from zero to nothing, the ego accumulates too quickly. And the trappings of your house or your household wealth and that life catches up, or two, you figure out how to reduce your ego and then try and manage that. I didn't do the latter. As a result, I just wasn't a good person to work alongside. So I had to do a lot of self-reflection after that. I was like, okay, cool. That's where I picked up stoicism, picked up a lot of things around managing my ego, who I was and what I wanted to be. And, ultimately it's led me down this path now, but probably the best lesson I could have. At the time, it fucking sucked getting fired. I've never been fired in my life. But to then get picked up and then have that opportunity afterwards of figuring out what you got to do to get out of this, that was pretty cool.
So if you could reframe that, like just sell more, what would you actually say in terms of articulating it to those people?
If I was to re-coach, I would ask, where are you struggling? That's the first thing. I would actually just do more, or I'd just ask more questions, right? Where are you struggling? Why are you struggling? What does that look like? Listen, and then actively pinpoint, and then see and go from, okay, cool. Well, look, you've identified that you actually don't have enough people to talk to and you don't have enough prospects. So how do we go and find you more prospects? And then let's go through that process and then break down, how would you do that? Well, if you've got to sell more entertainment books, does that mean you need to go talk to more restaurants? You need to talk to more restaurants. Where do you find them? Okay, cool. Search on Google, go talk to the ones that haven't got this here. Now you've got enough people in the book. Now you need to go out and find the charities to sell that to, all the schools, and then go through that process there, right? And that's like a structured plan of how to go from A to B. And you can have someone check in on it, and you have milestones that you'd set at each of those points. At the time, here, nebulous advice would be sell more. The complete inverse of that, right? So, and that's it there. But you've learned that now from management and being able to have, our own Kaimahi, our staff, and hopefully, I'm doing a much better job than I was.
So man, I can hear that people cotton on to this massive growth hack that you did with this gym, because then you got into a gig with TikTok.
Yeah, bro. Yeah, that was pretty cool. So yeah, TikTok before it was TikTok was Douyin and a thing called Musical.ly. So they acquired a company called Musical.ly in the States. And then Douyin, which is the Chinese company, had this own version of short form video. And so they're owned by a parent company called ByteDance. They reached out to us in 2019 and they found us through two ways. One, an investor saw a video I made on LinkedIn. It was one of the most commented videos in 2018, and they saw that and a couple of million views. And then the second, they just searched growth hackers at Los Angeles, and that's how they found us. And so this inquiry form comes in from TikTok. I reply to the lead and I'm like, kia ora, blah, 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 blah. I'm not even kia ora at that stage. It would have been just hello. My US co-founder and I get it. And I'm like, hey, thanks for coming through. Would you be open to changing, the UX of the app? Like, that's how fresh I was to who this app was and who they were. And we started with that as the first part of the conversation. And then they said to us, hey, look, actually, had the chat. This is what we have. Here's our product. Here's what we need help on. And we need you guys to, get these installs and get these people for us who's fit in these demographics in the US. And that's been a cornerstone for us to be able to use as sort of a growth lever. We worked with them for about a year and a bit, helping scale them growth in the US, from the US through to Taiwan and a whole range of other regions.
So what was the remit there? What's the demographic there?
Who do they want initially?
Yeah.
People...
I want to think about it. How did you see their play for growth? What was your take on their growth play?
I mean, it's astronomical, but if you look at it, what the way that they did it is, our attention spans are getting shorter. Yeah. People's ability to look or go through and understand what was happening at the time of how to use their phones was different to what TikTok does, right? And if you look at what I don't have my phone with me, it's in a different space, but at that point in time, the difference between what Instagram was, which was a square space, TikTok was just a full screen, right? And so you look at the difference between how that is viewed, the viewing experience and initially the product, really good, right? Okay, cool. What's more engaging? A full entire screen where I don't see anything else, or part of a block of a screen? So you think of like the user experience just on that. That's really good. And then you look at some of the other stuff, which is if our attention spans are getting shorter and we want to probably increase our dopamine response, well, we need to serve more in a shorter time. And so they were formed and based on like really short form content. Person does X, Y, and Z. I get a quick laugh and a hit, and I then can see the next one. I don't have to scroll because it'll auto scroll for me. And so if you think of those as user experiences, when people's using, like when you're jumping on an app and going through it, that process is actually really, really engaging. It's really hard to switch off a phone when it's like that and you've got that there. So that's the first piece, right? The product was just better at the time. We'd had Instagram, and then we got this thing that was just fully visual, took up your entire phone space, and auto provided you with content that was relatively easy to consume and super, super palatable. And that in itself is like, that's their biggest growth hack. When people talk about it, it's like that just hadn't been done. People had thought about Vine, but then combine the two of what it was, and then the social ability of sharing it and scaling it. And then they also just allowed it to link out to anywhere. So people were reposting on other social platforms, whereas they were trying to keep it gated on Instagram and Facebook. So that in itself, that whole consumer psychology, that's what they did really well. And what we did was we would then try and make that pretty enticing. So we helped build a software where on Instagram at that time, and this was a pretty big piece where like we got some influencers, and this is when people, if you had a good influencer audience, like you actually had a pretty engaged people. And we set up software where you could send up to, I think it was maybe 300 messages a day via the follow. So the person, so let's say this is an example, Brian D. Evans has 100,000 followers, and he was sending 300 messages a day to his followers saying, "Kia ora, I've just made this video." We'd send the first 10 seconds of that video. The rest of it's on TikTok if you want to have a look. And so we hired multiple influencers and had them sending these auto DMs per day, where people would then see this half second of a video going like, "Oh, wow, cool," and then jump across to the platform. And that was how we did and scaled their growth pretty quickly. Because a lot of the best influencers then took their audience with them. But at that time, can you imagine getting a message, probably not from someone quite like that, but The Rock sending you being like, "Hey, mate, I've just made this incredible content. Here's the first 10 seconds of it. Follow me on TikTok, see the rest." I would be like, "Fucking yeah, I'll follow you." So that was the process and how we did their growth. And again, as soon as people got on the platform, it just became hard to leave, right? Because of how engaging it was.
So there's two sides. There's growth and then cost of acquisition. Did that go down, the cost?
Yeah, well, the thing is, this is I think we probably missed a trick. We were being paid about 10 USD a user, but what we didn't account for is when someone got on there via our link, how many people did they refer organically and what did that look like? So we had no idea to be able to see what that was. And so again, I think TikTok knew that, like they had the right people of saying, okay, cool, probably every X person who joins with these guys is probably bringing another 20, right? So they knew their metrics and numbers. And at that stage too, when they were raising and getting capital, they probably would have said, cool, we're getting people for one person for $10 a user, but they're bringing another 20 to 30 people. Like that's some pretty good returns there.
So, where do you think it's going now? Like social media and social media intersected marketing.
Yeah, it's really interesting, bro. The place in where I think a lot of the time, or how you're going to have to do it, is that people were just going to build micro audiences. It's just going to become more and more of a thing because it's the same way you get used to billboard advertising. You see it sort of, sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't, but the message is 50-50, right? Whether or not it goes through. And it's the same thing now with influencers and some of that there. The content will be useful, but I think people are just going to start to build more select audiences of the things that they care about and what they want to follow, because there's just such a plethora of information. And there's some other companies out there, but for me, I think that's where, if I was to prescribe to people how they should market, choose who your customer segment is. Say, these are the people I want to serve. So age, okay, cool, 18 to 24. They're interested in rugby. They have some really key pieces around goals to becoming a professional rugby player. And then from there, they also have and buy frequent products around sports, investing in supplements. And so I just described to you Rugby Bricks target customer, and that's all we do is create content for that specific person. And then that's what that looks like. And I think, we're a biggish brand now. We've probably got maybe 500,000 collective followers across our socials and that sort of thing. But that type of ability to person to produce and curate micro audiences is going to be where I think most of this goes. And people then will start to sequester this into their own newsletters, that type of thing, which you're seeing with this. It's why we have a newsletter. I'm not sure if you've got one, but each person will then be trying to cultivate these micro audiences.
So that's what you're doing with Hakune.
Yep. Yeah. And that's it there. For me, it's just one, like if I want to stress test ideas, cool, we'll put these out into the public, right? So if I want to see, okay, cool, do people like what I'm writing about? Then I can get some pretty quick feedback on our newsletter and how people open, read what it says. And then the second is like, it's better to have, I think, an audience of 100 people who really love what you do versus, 10,000 people who are sort of lukewarm on what you do.
Cool, man. I'm really interested in why Dunedin. Obviously it's like globally it's kind of pretty isolated, but environment's really good for you, right? Right? Like environment's good for you. And then why do you choose Dunedin as your context and environment? Obviously it's about you thriving in that environment, especially in this kind of global game.
Yeah. Good part, Tybo. Good question. The reason that I choose here, like, it wasn't far from Central Otago, right? So just proximity. I wanted to go to uni here, and I didn't have to go from Alexandria. It was like 2.5 hours if I ever wanted to go home. So first one was just path of least resistance is how I ended up here. The reason I've stayed and what I've looked at is that having an international companies now, both of them with offices and spaces from Amsterdam to LA, there's two parts to it. One, I had loved convenience. Like I have a beach, I can drive this far, I'm at a river, and I can get to a gym, and I can do everything I love with probably in 10 to 15 minutes because not many people live here. And that for me, the utility of getting access to the things that I love in a fast or speedy amount of time is really, really high. I have very little desire to sit in traffic, and I have very little desire to make the things that I love doing harder. Right. And so I know what keeps me content, which is basically reading, learning, training, exercising, playing sport. And those things are all really cheap, but also very quick and easy to do here in Ōtepoti, and then being close to what is home for me, where I consider Central Otago. The second is, and I would definitely fall into this trap, and I avoid it intentionally, which is I would be trying to keep up with the Joneses if I moved to an Auckland or to a Brisbane even, or an LA. And the reason being is that I would probably at some point become under the wear and tear of seeing my friend driving a G-Wagon after however many times and think, fuck, I probably want one to impress them. And I'm aware of that. I think that's a really big piece, is that for me, the reason that, I've still maintained my wealth and not gone at the speed it is because to be content, I drive a nice car, a Subaru Outback 2022, but the need to want to consistently have more or appear to have more with what my other friends and peers are doing, that those temptations are really hard to avoid because, like I said, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I get a lot of my digital stimulation and everything I need through books and this type of interface. But the people I hang around with here in Otago, I don't know, half of them would be like, I think you run a marketing agency, don't you? You know what I mean? Like they just had no idea or care. And for me, it's a nice piece, right? The people that are judging or hanging out with me are based on the merit of who I am, and probably not on like what I own or what type of wealth I'm perceived to have.
That's cool, man, and a heap self-aware as well, which is a superpower. The barriers to doing global business from Dunedin, are there any, and how do you get around them?
None for me. I mean, we started our company like I met my business partner online. We didn't meet in person, Jonathan and Max, until 2 years in business. Like didn't go to the States till then. And so, or 2.5 years, I can't remember what that was. But, we'd always just run a business from computer. And I think in today, there's just never, ever been an easier time to do that. Like we started in 2016, 17. And for me, this, I mean, bro, you're in wherever you are in somewhere at the bottom of Queensland. And, I'm here in Ōtepoti. So if I look at that there, it's always just been the norm. And I actually just didn't think there was going to be a difference. I think that's a big one there that I've stumbled across, which is that ignorance is bliss. I've just missed a lot of the things where people, and I've seen this with Maori and Pacifica, seem to have this narrative that we can't do something, or because there seems to be a perceived barrier that people have said that it's going to be hard. I just went into it with my eyes sort of closed, and I was like, oh yeah, sweet, we should be able to do this. Tim Ferriss wrote about it. And that was just lucky that I didn't know or have any people to tell me it was going to be hard, because it did turn out to be hard. Not in the way that I thought it was going to be, in the fact that, you could just have a crack and start something from your computer.
Well, that's the thing. I think 2 weeks ago, I was in Darwin and I was presenting at the Indigenous Wellbeing Conference. Heaps of people from Aotearoa. Oh, man, it was a hard speech to craft. It was also a hard conference, to be honest. I can't believe I'm saying this, like in this kind of forum, but yeah, I didn't want to really hear. I like kind of stayed. I went into some sessions and then I came away. I didn't really want to hear the barriers and the challenges and often the deficit. And the essence of what I was saying was there's no greater time to be alive for Maori and Pacific, because if you look at the global context, well, geopolitics and that is saying that the superpowers are kind of shifting and there needs to be something different. And then the local context is the status quo isn't really working as well. There's a huge rate of change. There's marginalized knowledge that needs to come to the mainstream, because that's where we're going to get most of the advancement. And so we're sitting in a really great space. It's not really space.
And look, bro, and look, I totally what you're saying, because I find it hard. I walk into some hui, some wānanga, and people talk about, it's tough. Systemically, things are bad for us. They're much worse than what we've got these problems. And I've said this, and it's not been well received at all. Some of the things that we've talked about, which is for Māori by Māori. And what that does is it has a limiting factor for me and my belief in the way that we need the knowledge to come from inside us, but it means we're not grabbing all of the useful things that are free and accessed around us. And knowledge is so abundant, and the ability to make wealth is so abundant that, for all of us, this is the best opportunity we've ever had. And I find it very, very difficult seeing some of these things that systemically we're like, okay, cool, we need to settle, and we've been done injustices by the Crown. But if you're saying that, you're then saying my action starts once I've been given the go ahead from someone else to give us putia to start or cash to start. And, we started our business for me, and what it was from a laptop that was from the previous company that I'd worked from, and they gave that to me, and they had it when I left. And that was just like a huge blessing, right? And everything from there, we had no money in terms of what it was. I lost money in my first year in business from after earning on my job. And I just didn't think that there was any issue to why I couldn't do this, compared to the baggage that most of us carry now, which is, systemically, this has been a tough time for us as people, and it has, but that shouldn't be the barrier to making you start. If anything, if you look at your tupuna and everyone there, that your ancestors, their access and barriers to starting enormous. You know what I mean? And so I do battle. And again, this is not popularly received. I said an award I won, the Matiko Awards, and just went over quite poorly. But for me, that this is one of the things, and I think entrepreneurship, especially with what we have as Māori and Pacifica, credible stories to tell, but also the ability to capitalize on those things, is because people want it. So
I guess that was the essence of mine, was ownership and leadership. I was trying to say it in a kind of softer way. It was like, yeah, if we are going to get to the destiny that we think that we deserve, really, it's going to take ownership, which means we've got to own our initiatives, but also our businesses and our non-profits. We have to have ownership in that, and then courageous and hopeful leadership. Because all the generations that came before were really hopeful for a better generation. And I just feel like if we have that mindset, we're giving away our power and our agency to others, and that's going to rob us. Actually, that's the thing that robs us.
And by far and large, bro, like there's a great quote, which is belief comes before ability. And if you believe that you need to be given access to start, you'll wait. You're going to continue waiting. And it's the same for our people when we look at iwi or people going through, and some of the things, like we're afraid to have a go at that first because like we need to settle, or we're owed this. And to be honest, for me, like no one owes you anything. You have to figure out what that is, and you can fight for some of those things and make your way back. But again, those injustices have been and done. And the thing that's going to stop you from starting is having a belief that means that you need it to be granted for you. And so I didn't grow up in a Maori household. I grew up in a low socioeconomic status household where, domestic violence, alcoholism, and some of those things were problematic. But the not having any kaupapa Māori or some of those beliefs, I think some also have come to at least some of my advantage there, that I can say, like, I don't have any that baggage to believe that, hey, I'm Māori and I'm not smart enough to do this, or I'm Māori, that's not for me. And so, yeah, again, it's a tough ask, and it's something why I'm spending so much time in this space, at least going into governance and trying to sort of at least dispel the fact, and why I create content like I do, is that hopefully someone sees it, pick it up, and I can go and do it right there and then.
Yeah, 100. So we start at belief, but then we go into habits. And when I think of PTs, their habits are always there's always a lot of discipline in terms of their physical, training and stuff like that. you say you read a lot of books, and people who read a lot of books make time to read books, especially in a context like this where there's competing interests and things to do. Are you pretty structured in terms of, because I'm looking at, obviously the Success podcast, what are those tenets of success that you build into your daily life, those micro things?
Yeah, there's a few there, bro, and I will probably start with just at the moment, I live by myself in a 2-bedroom apartment in Ōtepoti. So I have very little pressures around like whānau to turn up and have to do things. And so that's a big, big prereq. Like a lot of people don't understand, or probably at least, I'll give prescriptive advice and they'll be like, bro, you've got no kids. And I understand. Yeah. I'll go stay with whānau who have children. I'm like, fuck it. Like, I'm out of here. You got me for like a week and I love hanging out with this. I love being the uncle, but this is a tough gig. So I'll preface it with that. But there's some really basic ones that I think require minimal willpower that give really, really big bang on return. And so the first is just nailing your sleep. And it starts with how you begin the day. So first one, like when I go to bed, turn my phone off, 8, and it's just off. Sweet. So like it's not on. And then when I wake up, it's not on. That's not what the thing that wakes me up. And so, the first habit is literally, as I wake up, I don't lean over to look at my phone and have my head down. The second is I look just straight up at the ceiling. The optic nerve is then one of the things that will allow you to then just increase your wakefulness. So just staring straight up. And that's the first thing. Next part, I jump into a warm shower, turn it cold. And that's there. Anyone who doesn't want to do that, that's my first anchor in movement. Second is just getting outside. Anyone who's seen or heard of Andrew Huberman, and anyone who's usually in the space now of entrepreneurship, he's a neuroscientist, but he's got a really great podcast around how to use science-based tools. Get outside and walk around the block for 10 minutes to get sunlight on my eyes. And then don't have coffee for the first hour. And that process in itself is, one, allowing your cortisol, natural body and things to rise. You get early morning sunlight, you get a little bit of exercise, and then you don't turn your phone on until then, and you have this coffee. And that's like just a really big way to be able to wake up easily. And so those 3 things are really simple and quite easy to do for most people. They can try and figure that out. And there's not, hey, you need to go there, sit, meditate for 20 minutes, read this book on like self-motivation and go through all these affirmations. Look, you need about 15 minutes. Have a crack at these things and have some willpower to turn your phone off. And that's like then setting you up to have a good sleep. Then the other part is just to get out in the afternoon, walk literally, or stand outside for 5 minutes. And then that'll just sort your sleep out. And then your sleep is the biggest part, right? If you think of your day in terms of 24-hour block or 24 chunks, and you use those there, well, 33% of that is sleep. So if you're not nailing that, and that's the biggest thing for us to get right, then you're just setting yourself up for a really shitty 16 hours. And so that's the first advice I give to anyone else. And I think those are the things, and then you just start to add on top of those, right? But that first principle to nail that down of just there will then result in a lot of other cascading positives, because when you have poor sleep, the rest of the stuff's shit. If you're going to screw up a third of your life, like you should look at that one block and chunk to nail, and then all my other habits are everything's just on the back of that.
As an entrepreneur, does your mind go to different places when you're going to sleep, and you just want to go Google?
Yeah, bro. Heaps of times I'll wake up, and last night's a good example. I woke up like 1 or 2, but I've just got an iPad beside my bed with like none of the social apps, nothing else. And I'll jump into some of the other things that I have, which is like my phone. I have it so you can click into black and white. There's like an accessory setup button, so you push it, hold 3 times, and then it just turns into black and white. So I'm not as addicted to it. I have no social apps on my phone. But when I'm there and as a founder, like in going through this process, I will just have the notes pad and I'll just write them down. And that's a big way for me to capture it. The other stuff that I think has been very, very useful for me as a founder, and I have every day, I have what is a daily review. And it's a Google form I fill out at the end of every day that asks me 5 or 6 questions. So what did you achieve today? Did you finish the top 3 tasks? If not, what stopped you from doing so? And then the next question is, what are the 3 things you want to achieve tomorrow? What's stuck in your head? And then how would you rate the day? And then that's it. And I go to myself 1 out of 10 scale. Those 6 questions I'll go through. And then that gives me like a shut off to at least say, okay, cool, I've done that. And then it sets me up for success for the next day.
So growth and productivity is not business, it's actually a life hack.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. And that's the things, right? And they're compounding in the way that you get good at these things. So cumulatively, if you get consistently good sleep, like that compounds to better and better outcomes. And today's like a good example of where I've done the opposite. I usually wouldn't have more than one coffee. Like I have a coffee in the morning and that's it. Had a coffee this afternoon and then had another coffee with another mate. And so like I'm hyper caffeinated, but I know that's going to fuck up my sleep tonight. But most of these things are just, if I look at growth and what it is, a lot of people talk about it as like, and the way that it's portrayed by people like myself who market it, there are things that you can do to lever and pull it, but most of the time it's just the result of consistency and compounding of those results that then get you to a place where you can actually say, okay, cool, this is working and this is what that looks like.
So in life and business, it's a lot about the macro, but also mostly about the micro.
I think for me, it's the small daily battles won, right? And just doing those consistently. And it's just investing in things that compound, right? One of the things, and everything compounds positively or negatively. If I consume, a piece of social media content, and if I jump on there, I'm more likely to consume 10 more pieces. And those are habits that compound negatively. If I read one page of a book, I'm likely to read another 10 pages of a book, right? And so those micro battles each day are things there. And just choosing those habits are the ones that allow you to stack to get you on the right path. And I think you may have heard of it, or probably most people have, which is the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. He does a very good way of structuring these things. But for me, I do these things daily to allow me to be successful, but also to give me the freedom of time when I'm not in the business to have to think about that or going through it. And I'm guilty, definitely. I work a lot more than most people, but I certainly use these things as tools to compound myself, my growth, and the way that I want and where I want to live and how I want my life to look like.
So back to the macro then, what are your goals for the business? I love that you've published Black Friday, you made this much, there's 300% growth in Rugby Bricks SEO, 14 days. It's really, really accurate. What's the big goal for you in business?
Yeah, right. So I've got this there, and part of that thing is like I've got just a principles doc that I read every day. And so one is just the first goal, which is to employ 20 Maori or Pacifica in our organizations to give them the same skill that I have. So a lot of me and a lot of what I've been able to do is just been on the back of developing a pretty robust skill set in growth, marketing, that type of thing. And ideally, I teach more about people how to do that and how we can go through that process. So that's the other one. The second is to have generated $12 million in liquid assets by the time I am 36. So what am I now, 33? And the reason being is just that's enough to create, at a worst case scenario off of a bank, which is in the low interest area, if I gave it in the worst return of 3% a year, enough to create a very good, livable, feasible income for me, whānau on there. The third is just to have, look after the partner that I've got and have a couple of kids, a couple of tamariki. And then the fourth piece, which is something that I'm trying to figure out and going through too, is I've got a disease called Crohn's disease. So chronic bowel disease an issue, and there's no cure for it. Got diagnosed when I was 21, but basically it's an inflammatory bowel disease. You get crook. If you get stressed, your bowels flare up, you end up in a pretty bad or hospitalized situation. And so for me, trying to figure out how I would cure that, and probably going back to uni and getting a master's in bioinformatics or starting down that pathway.
Wow, that's inspiring, man.
Appreciate it, bro.
I just love the clarity that you got. It's just so detailed. You know where you want to be by this time, how much, and I think a lot of people know the theory, but they haven't really embedded it into their lives like you. Both on the macro, this is my goal, it's measured, and all those smart things, but the micro, this is how we do it day by day. There had to be a process that you went through in order to have that kind of willpower and that kind of discipline.
Yeah, it did, bro. And there's a whole range, right? Like it started with reading philosophy. It was choosing the alternative. And I think this is one of the things too. I feel maybe to an extent there's empathy for people who have been wealthy, is that I know what the alternative is, right? Which is waking up in a household where you don't get to have breakfast because your mum's asleep or she's drunk too much the night before and you don't get to go to school. And you're worried that you might see SIFs, and that alternative is like what the worst case scenario is, right? And you can see that and feel that in reality. And for me, I know that that's what this looks like. And I also have a brother who's incredible bloke, love him to death, but also, he's not doing so good, the work and what he's doing. And I have that alternative really visibly and clearly for me. And so I'm really aware that as I've gone and adopted some of these things, which have been very hard up front, typically have resulted in a payoff down the road. And It's a really good book for anyone who wants to read this. It's called The Same as Ever, by a guy named Morgan Housel, who wrote a great book called The Psychology of Money. Both are excellent. But I know by investing in these habits and these things here, like I'm setting future Kale up for a long-term success. And then it also desensitizes me to hard things, right? There's a lot of hard stuff that happens to life, but problems are par for the course and the things that you want to solve. And by going through these processes and choosing that hard path now, making it easier in the future.
Awesome, man. Right. I appreciate this. I want to keep you on time because I know we have to. Just one song. What do you reckon? What's the one song that you maybe that kind of like resonates with your life or the philosophy of your life? Do you have a song?
Yeah, there's a couple, bro. There's one that comes to mind, which is "Second to None" by Mike Shinoda.
Oh man.
And yeah, bro, I love that song because it's essentially him saying, "Hey, look, I'm the shit. I've got this. I'm the best one here, and like I'm gonna be second to none." And it's a really powerful, motivating song, at least for me, where it's like, "Okay, cool. I'm gonna have a crack at this. I will do the best I can, but I'm not gonna take second place." And that type of tenacity or belief is that I'm gonna have a crack. High percentage chance I'll fail, but having the belief that I can be second to none is something that allows me just to keep going when shit's hard.
Well, there we have it. Kale Panoho, ladies and gents, a measured, articulate, confident, and courageous entrepreneur who I think sees every aspect of himself as a big development and continuous improvement journey. From improving his micro habits of sleep and nutrition to exploring more of his Maori whakapapa and heritage, through to wealth creation, community service, and even discovering a cure for a disease he's had to live with. An amazing story of a guy who seems to have done so much and yet really is only 33 years of age. So I can't wait to watch the rest unfold, and no doubt Kale will explain the meaning behind his journey through his content on platforms such as LinkedIn and Hakune the Method, which is his newsletter, with the same unique simplicity that seems to be a Kale Panoho superpower. Please follow Kale on LinkedIn and his companies Rugby Bricks, K&J Growth, and Hakune, and glean off his content for your own benefit. All of the links will be on the show notes, and I'm looking forward to continuing to follow the guy. On that note, a special thanks to my team who helped me to deliver this podcast, and Pablo, Derek, Leli Fano, and Sol Mokdad. Please like and subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn, Insta, and Facebook. At Manawais Group is our handle. But once again, thank you to Kale. Congratulations to him for all of his success, and we look forward to many, many more. Take care, have a great week, and God bless.